Welcome to everyone who has joined us today for our webinar. Good afternoon. My name is Carla Easter, and I'm with the National Human Genome Research Institute. And again, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar on writing for the public. The webinar will feature presentations from two wonderful speakers, Dr. Brittany Baur and Dr. Gunter. Before we begin, I want to ask that you please enter any of your questions in the Q&A section. For the purposes of this webinar, we have disabled the chat function. The webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on the unlockinglifescode.org website. Before we begin the presentations, I'd just like to take a few minutes to introduce our two speakers. Our first speaker will be Dr. Brittany Baur, who is the editor-in-chief for the online journal Genomics Insights. Dr. Baur is a postdoctoral researcher in the Wisconsin Institute for Discovery at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She received her PhD in computational sciences from Marquette University, and her research focuses on developing machine learning approaches to predict long-range enhancer-promoter interactions across cell lines and species. Our second speaker will be Dr. Gunter. She is a senior advisor for genomics engagement at the National Human Genome Research Institute, or NHGRI. Dr. Gunter is also a researcher in the NHGRI Social and Behavioral Research branch, where she is heading a new engagement methods unit. She earned her bachelor's degree in genetics and biochemistry from the University of Georgia and her PhD in genetics and molecular biology from Emory University. She previously served as a senior editor at Nature, director of research affairs and faculty investigator at the Hudson Alpha Institute for Biotechnology, and most recently, before coming to NHGRI, she was a director for communications operations at the Marcus Autism Center, Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and as an associate professor in the departments of pediatrics and human genetics at Emory University School of Medicine. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Baur to begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Carla. First, we'll give an overview of the presentation today. So I'll be covering what is the Genomics Insights newsletter, how can trainees write about, Chris will be going over how trainees can write about genomics for non-science audiences, and then I will also cover how can and should they do it in Genomics Insights. So first we have poll 1. What's the latest exciting genomics story that you've heard about?
Okay, this is the fun of Zoom.
We have a poll going.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the poll coming up yet. Oh, there we go. Can everybody see that?
I can see it now.
All right. So we just thought of this with some exciting genomic stories that have come out in the past, while. And so we're asking what's the latest one that you remember hearing about? And that should be X chromosome sequence from one into the other. Got cut off there. Okay, it looks like we have about not quite 75% of people voting. So let's see what they said. There we go. 100% of people heard about CRISPR winning the Nobel Prize. That's great. Oops, let me share the results. There we go. That's great. All these other ones are obviously also true, but it sounds, Brittany, like we have a lot of people who are interested in genomics, which is great.
Awesome. Okay, so the reason science communication is really, really important is because science is our way of kind of understanding the world. And so it's very important that everybody understands science. For one thing, this has consequences when people make individual decisions about their own health or people making policy decisions. Science is for everyone, so everyone should understand it. And the more people understand and appreciate science, the more they trust the data that's being presented and the science that's being presented. So I'm showcasing here a couple of particularly bad examples of science communication, and that's not to say that all science communication is bad. These are just some examples of bad science communication. So in the world of gene editing, for example, these narratives are a little bit scary and unrealistic, and so we want to give people a more realistic impression of what we do in science and what we do in genome sciences, rather than having these kind of be the dominating narratives. Next slide, please. So this comes down to kind of an issue called framing. And this article specifically talks about precision medicine. And so a lot of articles will really highlight the positive aspects of particular scientific developments without really focusing on any of the negative aspects or the concerns or the limitations. So most articles tend to be overwhelmingly positive. And as the article word count goes up, they showed that the number of concerns that the article raises about a particular development go up as well. And so you kind of have to wonder if people are really reading about any of the concerns or limitations. And again, this isn't like to say that precision medicine is bad. It's just with everything, there's limitations and caveats and concerns. And so we kind of want to present this information neutrally instead of presenting it overwhelmingly negative or overwhelmingly positive. Next slide, please. So that brings us to the objectives of our newsletter, Genomics Insights. So we serve as a platform for students, so that's high school students, undergraduates, and grad students, and postdoctoral trainees to be afforded an opportunity to write and develop their scientific communication skills and undergoing a peer review process. And so I think that one of the ways we can improve kind of the scientific communication that's out there and the narratives that are out there is training scientists to talk about their research and write about their research in a non-technical way that avoids jargon, specifically because if the scientists are able to talk about it, then that kind of is a direct way of kind of explaining scientific research. And then on the other end of it, this would serve the community as well, because people would have a place where they can read about scientific advancements without a lot of technical jargon, and it will be accessible to them, and it'll be written directly from scientists. So the article types I'll go into later, but kind of just short opinion, scientific communication, and narrative type pieces. Next slide, please. And this is what it looks like on the website. So you can go to the website and actually see how the articles look. We have a bunch of articles up already. And so, and later on in the webinar, I'll talk about how to actually submit to Genomics Insights as well. Next slide. Another poll. What is your go-to source for reading more about genomics?
So we wanted to ask all this because, yeah, when you think about where you learn about genomics news, and therefore maybe where you'd like to write for, we're just curious as to where do you normally go when you're thinking about genomics, or where do you hear about it? All right, we have about a third of people voting. And our choices are blogs, Twitter, news media, and then textbook or class readings. So I'll show you mine in a second. I don't know, Brittany, where do you normally get your news media on genomics?
So I follow a lot of scientists in my field on Twitter. So lately they'll post their articles once they're up on bioRxiv or if they're published in a journal. And so I like the latest articles I've been finding lately on Twitter.
Excellent. Cool. All right. I'm going to end it here. We have about 2/3 of people voting. And let me share the results so we can see. People said Twitter and news media were tied there for where they get things. And of course, Twitter often shows things from the news media. So that's kind of a chicken and egg there a little bit. But yeah, that's great. That's something to think about when you're thinking about where to write for. Okay. I'm going to close that. And hopefully it's going to let me advance. There we go. So this is for me. So Brittany's told us about why we're here today is to talk about writing about science as a trainee. And she's going to tell you about one place you can write about, which is great, Genomics Insights, the newsletter. That's where we're hoping you'll write. But I'm also going to tell you a little bit about just how generally to talk about science. So here's where I get a lot of my science news. This is a screenshot of my Twitter feed last night. And I wanted to show this for two reasons. Number one, because we're going to talk about preprints. You can see over here in the home column. I use a program called TweetDeck, which I recommend. In my home column, you can see that bioRxiv had just put up a whole bunch of preprints about genomics. And so I'll tell you about preprints in just a minute. But then the great thing about using a program like TweetDeck to use Twitter is that you can create columns. So this middle column is searching for the hashtag SciEngage because I'm interested in science engagement, and that's what a lot of people use. And so you can just create a column that follows that hashtag. And then on the right, I've created a list called Genome Scientists, which is a bunch of people who are genome scientists, as the name implies. And that way, when I want to see stuff that is more specific to genomics, I mean, right now it's all election and COVID and everything, but a little more specific to genomics, it'll show up in this column here of TweetDeck. So if you're using Twitter, as a number of you said you were, that's one way to kind of control and direct the news that you're going to see. So that's where I get a lot of my science news as well. So I'm going to back up here and talk about why you should tell people about genomics. And we should also say that we are, as Carla said, and Faith will be monitoring it as well. If you have questions, you can ask them in the Q&A, and we'll be able to look at them at the end here. So why should you tell people about genomics at all? Obviously, science is cool, right? As Brittany said, I mean, we are biased because that's our jobs, but we think science is cool. But I want to show you this poll to show that people are interested and they want to hear about it from you. So here is a poll that came out, and it was done in 2016, and this is from the National Science Foundation Statistics about Science and Engineering in 2018. And you can see I put two red arrows on the new medical discoveries and new scientific discoveries. So the dark green is very interested. The light green is moderately interested, and the blue is not at all interested. I don't know who those people are. But you can see most people are very or moderately interested in new medical discoveries and new scientific discoveries. So people really do want to hear about it. And importantly, they also want to hear about these things from you as a scientist. So this is also a survey from earlier this year. This goes through 2019, and they asked Americans, this is the Pew Research Center, who's a polling organization, they asked Americans with whether they have a great deal or fair amount of confidence in each of the following groups to act in the best interest of the public. And you can see that scientists and medical scientists are right up there with military, members of the military, and K-12 public school principals. And down here at the bottom are elected officials, business leaders, and the news media, right? So we've said we hear about science from the news media, but actually it looks like people have a lot of trust in you as a scientist and as a trainee, and they want to hear about things from you. And we're going to talk about this term a little bit later, but you should realize that you are a nerd of trust for people who know you, and you can extend that to people who don't even know you if you want to talk more about things that you know about because you're learning about them. So today we're going to focus on writing about science websites, and just to show you, this is one example of how I've done this in the past. This was a paper that I helped write in 2014, which was trying to establish a problem that still exists, but is getting much, much better in human genomics, where if we find a hit between a random variant in the genome and it looks like risk of developing a certain disease, how do we go about establishing that that variant actually causes a higher risk for that disease? Still a problem that we're working on, lots of interesting science there. But when we had this paper come out, myself and the first author, my friend Daniel, also wrote a blog. This is one example for a website called Spectrum, which focuses on autism research, and that's what I worked on, so I happen to know them. And you can see that we just wrote a blog post talking about how important it was to do this kind of work and what we talked about in our paper. So that's an example of the kind of things that you can do on Genomics Insights, as Brittany is going to tell you, or other websites, is write about your work, or you can write about other people's work. Both of those are really valuable, and we need all of it. So just some general tips about science writing. You want to read the venue that you're going to before you write. And if I were giving you a talk about how to publish in a journal, I would tell you the same thing. Read the journal that you're submitting to before you submit there, because you want to make sure that it's a good fit. If you want to write about climate change, for example, or the importance of solar power for something related to climate change, Genomics Insights might not be your best place unless it has some kind of genomics angle in what you want to write about, for example. So just make sure that your story fits with the kind of stories they cover. Would your story work for that audience? Is it too high? Is it too not high enough? For example, if you're going for a scientific journal, just make sure it's a good fit. You also want to talk to people outside of your area of expertise. So when you tell your parents or your friends about your project or the thing you want to write about, what kind of questions do they ask you, right? Those are the questions people are going to be interested in. What parts of the project or the science capture their imagination, right? What do people say? Oh, wow, that's really cool. That's what you want to focus in on when you're writing. You also want to make sure you answer the so what question. So why does this really matter, right? You've sequenced the turtle genome. That's cool. Why does it matter? What do we need to know about the turtle genome, right? Did we learn something about the way that they construct their skeleton, which is really cool, and that might have implications for the way that we make artificial bones or something like that? That's really cool, right? So something like that. You want to answer the so what question. You also want to avoid jargon, and I'm going to pick on myself and other authors at NHGRI. We just put out a paper, which I highly encourage you, of course, to read, which is our 2020 strategic vision for the next 10 years-ish of what we think that should happen in genomics and what we as a Human Genome Institute will be supporting and are interested in and think should happen. And I just copied this sentence out of here. Near-term expectations include enhanced capabilities for generating high-quality and complete genome sequences and continued refinement and enhanced utilization of a human genome reference sequence that increasingly reflects human variation and diversity on a global scale, and that serves as a substrate for genome annotation. What does that even mean? I just read that to you really fast. What does that even mean, right? This is an example of what you have to do when you're writing for a public website. You have to translate that into something that people can actually understand. So I have taken a shot at that on this slide here. And really what they're saying is, what we are saying is soon we can really sequence all of the genome, not just parts of it, all of it, for lots of different people. And we're going to better understand what the letters in the genome mean, if you use that analogy of letters in the genome, what the variants in the genome mean, something like that. Yeah. So that's basically what we're saying here, but in a more understandable way. So that's the kind of translation that you'll need to do when you write for a website like this one. And you know, you do this all the time, right? When you're explaining your project to other people, you're doing things like this all the time. So all you're doing is putting that into writing when you're writing a piece like this. So here's one example if you're looking at websites that are models for how you could write for this. And Brittany's going to show some other examples that are specifically what Genomics Insights is looking for later on. But here's one example that a lot of people like, and it's called The Conversation. It is specifically a website, and I've put the URL on the bottom here. It's specifically a website that takes stories, as you can see here. Are you currently employed as a researcher or academic with a university or government scientific research institutions? Or if you're a student, are you a PhD candidate? So this is for graduate students and postdocs right now, but undergrads, you'll get there. And so you can see that they take pitches for stories, right? So they tell you what kind of stories they're looking for specifically. And then when I, on the right, search for genomics on their website, I found these stories here, right? Not all genes are necessary for survival. Are we ready to sequence genomes of newborns in the US, right? So these are the kind of things that if you want to talk specifically about some of your higher level work and projects that you're doing, The Conversation is a great place to do that. So that's one example. The second example, all I should have to do is say his name, Ed Yong. Like, that's all I should have to say. Y'all should be following Ed. If you're not following Ed, you should absolutely be following Ed. He's amazing. He's awesome. So Ed right now, as a staff writer for The Atlantic, he has been doing science writing forever. I don't know how he does it. It covers so many things at once. We cannot all be Ed Yong because he's amazing. But he has written some of the best summaries and stories about the pandemic, around science about the pandemic, also going into policy. So you can find those at The Atlantic. But I knew Ed back when he was not on the pandemic beat and instead was on the weird nature beat, which is really more fun if you're looking for examples of what to look at. So I just selected 3 of them here. For smart animals, octopuses are very weird. Narlugas are real, which is the hybrid between a narwhal and a beluga, and bonobo mothers are very concerned about their son's sex lives. That is a perfect Ed Yong story there. He takes these are all based on hardcore science papers, right? Real science publications. And he does a great job of translating those into something that's interesting. He finds the so what question here. Octopuses are very weird, even though they're smart, right? And is able to make that into a hook that people want to read. So I highly encourage you to look up Ed. Is a great example of a science writer working now. So they also wanted to make sure that we talk to you about how to cover unpublished science. So this is something that has come up more often. It sounds like, as Brittany will tell you, a lot of things that you're writing about for Genomics Insights, maybe things that are already published, but you also might want to cover some unpublished science. So I'm going to tell you about two flavors of doing that. The first is preprints. And so these are unpublished and not peer-reviewed. That's really important to know, not peer-reviewed versions of manuscripts. So the two biggest sites, which have really just emerged in the last 5 or 6 years, are called bioRxiv, that X is a chi, and medRxiv. And the medRxiv is for medically related papers, obviously, and then bioRxiv is for the rest of biology, basically. So I just took this screenshot, I can't remember if it was last night or this morning, from the genomics section of bioRxiv, and you can see there's 3 manuscripts right here. Again, I actually help screen papers for bioRxiv, and I can just tell you that our criteria for getting something into bioRxiv are: is it a paper? Is it science? Is it an actual manuscript and not a review paper? And does it have a method section? Those are the criteria that we're looking for, right? So for things to go into bioRxiv, we're not talking about peer review, and we're not talking about a really high level of screening to get in. You have seen in the yellow box, which is why I wanted to show this to you, we have at bioRxiv have gotten many papers on coronavirus. And so we've had to up the standards just a little to make sure, particularly with coronavirus related things. But you should know that if you're covering manuscripts that are in bioRxiv, they have not been peer reviewed. So plenty of news reporters do that. Ed Yong has done that. Other people have done that. But they make caveats that say this is not peer reviewed, right? So that's just important to know. You just, as it says on the bottom here, bottom left, you just want to use caution when you're writing about them, but they are fair game to write about. And another way that you can cover unpublished science is by going to conferences. So this is a screenshot from the American Society of Human Genetics meeting that many of us went to last week. You should know that the talks that are given at meetings are fair game for coverage, right? They're public. Scientists are speaking in public. But the caveat is that many journals say to them, if their work is under review or it's submitted to a journal but hasn't been published yet, that they're not supposed to seek press coverage. So you can ask people questions they may or may not be able to answer because that they may think it counts as seeking press coverage if you're asking them questions about it. So for something like Genomics Insights, hopefully that would be less pressure, but that's just something you should know about. You can write about things that are at conferences, but it's sometimes a little harder until it actually gets published. So one last slide on this topic, which is what not to do. So plagiarism, seriously, do not. I mean, y'all are all in school, you know this. Don't use other people's words or images. You can see I have the link here for this meme where I found it online. I was trying to find a meme that would appeal to younger people than me, but I don't know, I just Statler and Waldorf, I had to go with them. I mean, come on. They're the OGs, right? So don't use other people's words or images without proper attribution. And if you are interested, there's a huge movement about people's photos and science art being used without attribution. There's a huge backlash against that. So please make sure that you give proper credit when you use art. You might think, oh, I just found this really cool picture of a cell on the internet. I'm just going to stick that in my story. No, you need to find out who should be credited for taking that picture because someone took it, right? The cell did not take a selfie. Okay, anyway, so, and then, yeah, you got to amuse yourself, right? So, and then also do not use unpublished data in these stories without the consent of the lab or the PI or the investigator that you're talking to. So if you want to write stories about unpublished data from your lab, as Brittany will tell you, that's possible, but you need to make sure that your PI is aware of what you're doing because there may be reasons like competition not to share that. So that's really important not to put that out without making sure you check that. So. Okay, so those are some tips on how to write about science. There's many websites and other places out there that go into more depth than I did and give you story types of advice like narrative. I encourage you to use narrative, but that's kind of an overview of some ways that you can write about science for a more popular audience. And then since we talked about Twitter some, we're going to ask you a third poll here, which is, we're curious how many of you want to talk about science on your social media account? So if you have a social media account, how many of you choose to want to think about talking about science, or do you want to keep science out of it? We have voting going on here. A lot of us have Twitter accounts, since we're fed, like myself, we have specific guidelines on what we can and can't say and whether we can say it's from NIH or not. So, okay, a few more seconds for everybody to vote here. Okay, so we got 75%, so I'm going to end the poll and show you the results. So yes, 55% of you do that already. Awesome. I think that's great. You don't have to do that though. You might want to use your social media for something else. So another 20% of you say you'd like to, which is great. We're going to talk about some tips on how to do that. And then another quarter of you say that's not what you use social media for. Also totally fine, right? It is a tool and you can use it how you want to use it. So I'm going to show you a few examples of how, if you want to use social media to talk about science, how you can do that. So remember what we talked about earlier, being a nerd of trust. So this is a great paper if you're interested, excuse me, in getting a little bit deeper into the topic, which is how to be a nerd of trust, right? This was one specifically was about asking scientists to do, looking at science outreach and how they became a nerd of trust. And here I showed you on the right here is one very active lately nerd of trust who we might all know, and that is Dr. Fauci, right? He has been everywhere. So here he is using social media to convey science, and specifically in this case, he is on an Instagram live with Steph Curry, right? And this got, hundreds of thousands of hits, right? People watching it. That's great. He is out there getting science out to people. And that is a really great way, in my opinion, to use social media to do that. So think about that. Then you're a nerd of trust. If you think about it, you have people on Facebook who are friends, or their friends are friends, and they're lawyers, right? I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything about law. Not very much anyway. We're all more expert now after the election, but I don't know a lot about law. And so if I saw someone on there who I knew to be a lawyer, who I knew was a friend, or I knew they seemed like a trustworthy source and they were talking about some legal thing, I'd be more likely to believe them. Well, that's how people look at you, right? You're a genomicist. You're their science nerd of trust when you talk about things. So you can post about science, and good science, as Brittany was saying earlier, and that has an effect and gets that out to more people. So if you want to do that, here's the best 4 tips for using social media to talk about your science. And you can apply these to science writing too. The first one is you want to know your desired outcome and the audience that you want to reach to meet it. Okay. So again, with science writing, the same thing. Are you trying to publish a scientifically oriented paper that should be aimed at a standard science journal? Or are you trying to reach a popular audience, right? So what's your outcome? Think about that in advance. What's the audience you want to reach? And then you want to know what your message is, right? That's important to know. The third one is you want to then do the experiment, tailor your communication method, platform style to reach that desired audience. So that's actually doing the work. And the fourth part that most people forget afterwards, but is really important, is you want to evaluate. Did it work as you intended? Who engaged with it? What happened, right? Did you get what you wanted out of it? And so since you're all science trainees, it sounds like, the way I would think about this is just like doing an experiment. These first 2 are basically your hypothesis and your introduction, right? Here's what I think is going to happen. Here's what I want to happen. This third part is the method section, actually doing the work. And then the fourth part is stating your results, right? What results did I get from doing this? That's how I would think about using social media or science writing to talk about science. So here's 2 examples. On the left here are know your desired outcome and audience. So let's say that I wanted to talk about science and I was trying to reach a specific demographic because that's who I really wanted to reach. So these are 2 insights from a company called Sprout Social that looks at social media. And you can see what they were saying is that about 75% of females supposedly have a Facebook account, which is amazing. But you can see the gender is different a little bit between females and males is what they're trying to say here. And then the age distribution, more importantly, is quite different, as you all know, between Instagram and Facebook, right? So the oldies, like myself, are on Facebook, although I'm getting off. And then the younger people are on Instagram, right? So if I wanted to reach a younger audience, I would go to Instagram, right? And then on the right is a Twitter analytics page. This is actually from my Twitter account, which is @girlscientist. So who engaged, right? So if I have a specific tweet and a message I want to get out there, a page like the Twitter analytics page can help me actually see who's looking at it, who actually looked at my account, who did I engage with the most, what tweet of mine do people like the most. You can see in the middle of this page here, the top media tweet here on the bottom, which is a GIF of the kinesin protein walking or actually strutting down a microtubule. If you don't know that GIF, that is the best thing ever. And you can see that's the top media tweet, which people really liked, of course. So that's something to think about. Again, that's your results section. Did I get what I wanted to get out of this? Okay, and I'm going to turn over to Brittany to talk about more specific submissions.
All right, thank you. All right, so if you're interested in specifically submitting to Genomics Insight, so these are short articles that are 500 to 1,500 words. You can include 2 figures or tables. So I really encourage everybody to make original figures, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Please include in-text citations. I've gotten a few submissions that didn't have in-text citations. So when you reference something, you want to assign it a number in the order that you've referenced it, and then put that in the text. And if you're interested in submitting, we have a deadline of December 15th to be included in the January issue. And you can head over to Unlocking Life's Code to see all this information and more detailed information about the guidelines and the formatting for Genomics Insights. Next slide. So these are just like kind of an overview of the types of articles we are interested in including. So short opinion pieces, communications on recent scientific advancements. So we mentioned that the X chromosome has been sequenced to end. That's something that somebody wrote about. And that was really cool. I was really excited to see that somebody wrote an article for Genomics Insights about it. So these are all things that you can kind of look at as potential things that you can write about. The narrative or history of a particular field, how it's gotten to where it is. If you see a common misconception floating around the media and social media, or if you want to kind of demystify and recent advancement in genomics, those are things you can write about. And how research in a particular field is done, like how specifically do scientists work from day to day. So what's not accepted is lab reports. Again, Chris mentioned this, but unpublished results, if you do research in your lab, you probably want to submit your unpublished results to Nature or Cell. And you can talk about your own research, but please run it by your PI if you are in some sort, to make sure that everything is either you're just referencing things that you've published previously, and there's nothing in there that could compromise your research or your lab's research. And then, of course, if you have no or limited genomics or genetics, then it can't be in Genomics Insights. But Chris mentioned some alternatives if you have a science interest outside of genomics. Next slide, please. So one of the questions that I get the most is how people can how you can come up with a topic. And so there's really no wrong or right way to do this. It kind of just depends on, what you're interested into. And I encourage people to write about what they're interested in, because if they're excited about it, the article will probably be a lot better than if they write something that they don't really care about. So it should be something that you're actually passionate about. And this slide has animation, so we'll do the first one. So if you do research or you have research that you'd like to do, this obviously is a good starting point. So if you, you could put them, you could just, put all 3 up for now. So if you have research that you're doing, you can write about that. What I would recommend is also just kind of pulling back a little bit, because the research that we do is really specific and in the weeds, and we're usually addressing very specific questions that haven't been addressed. So for example, I work on very specific questions within 3D genomics as it relates to breast cancer and genetic variation and all this stuff. But I would pull back and I'd look at the field of 3D genomics and what are the major problems and fundamental questions people are trying to understand within that field. Another thing we talked about a lot already is what's trending on social media. What are people writing about? What are the major scientific advancements? So we got recently the X chromosome again being sequenced from end to end. We got the Nobel Prizes being awarded. So you can look on Twitter, you can look on websites like Scientific American or many others that have been mentioned. So that's another thing. And then a third tip to kind of come up with a topic is if there's any common misconceptions, and I just have a COVID molecule here because early on, when, you know, back in March, there was a lot of like kind of misconceptions that COVID might have been bioengineered, and so these are some things that you can write about in Genomics Insights. So these are just things to think about if you're trying to think about a topic. Next slide. So these are just kind of specific questions that you might ask, try to come up with a topic. A lot of people are writing about how to improve diversity in human genomic studies, which is a major issue right now. And then, rationale for selecting a model organism, the pros and cons of direct-to-consumer and ancestry kits, and we'll go over an example, a really well-written article in just a second about that. So the topics are wide-ranging as long as it's genomics or genetics, so genomic technologies, genetics and ancestry, epigenomics, clinical genetics, also ethics and policy. And this is not exhaustive, but as long as it's anything within the field of genomics and genetics, it should be fine. Next slide. So this was an article, it was one of our first articles written about direct-to-consumer genetic testing by Carla Claudio, who was a postdoc and now works in industry. And I really like this article. So the information that she presents just kind of goes over the benefits and the risks of doing a genetics test. It's very neutrally written. And the other thing I like about it is it has this kind of question and answer format, and it avoids all the jargon, as we will see. There's not too many terms there that are jargon, and when there is kind of a jargony term like SNP or single nucleotide polymorphism, it's defined. Next slide. So that's actually, yeah. So here's where SNP is defined. So this is just introducing what genetic testing is. And then, so the figures here, I encourage everybody to include figures. It aids in your communication. Science communication isn't just writing, it's also making figures. It could definitely help you get your point across when you're writing an article. So here she's just showing how has increased years. And in yellow is something we do, which is have a quote that gets pulled up, and we ask you to pick the quotes from their articles, or sometimes we'll suggest some, but the author will pull out their own quotes that get highlighted in yellow. And I feel like this is a good exercise too, because it really gets you thinking about what the important points are of your article, and also just what are the fundamental things that you want to get across in your article. So here it's just a definition for what genetic testing is. So that's one way you can do it. Next slide, please. And so here she's talking about how DTC genetic tests can determine your disease risk. And this is another kind of thing that is a misconception to some people, because they might see in a genetic test that they get a certain result and they might get upset about it. But there's a lot of caveats there when you're taking a direct-to-consumer test. So this information is just kind of presenting it very neutrally. So these are things that you want to think about when you're writing an article about what kind of misconceptions might be out there. And then I really like her figure down here. It just kind of highlights all the points, the pros and the cons. So you might get knowledge about your ancestry and risk factors, but there's potential information breaches. And so again, it really is important to kind of make your figures so that they can kind of just complement your writing and really get certain points across. So this is a nice article to look at. There's other articles on Genomics Insights that I'd also encourage you to look at, but this one was a really nice one as well. Next slide, I think that's the last one, or there's a poll. Poll 4, are you interested in any follow-up sessions on science writing?
Our colleagues in the training team ask us to ask you this while you're here, so they can plan for the future. That's great, Brittany, and we'll have the, like you said, people can go through the Unlocking Life's Code site, right, to find Genomics Insights. And
yeah, I highlighted that article, but there's a lot of really good articles up already.
Absolutely.
Everyone from high school students to postdocs.
Yeah, perfect. All right, we have over half people voting, so I'm gonna show the results here. So it looks like yes, 95% of people. So this is a good transition to Faith, who's going to lead us in the Q&A. But yeah, 95% of people say that they would like to have more sessions on science writing. So maybe in the Q&A, y'all can give us some suggestions for those. And now, thanks very much for listening to us, and we'll take any questions.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, let me know if you can hear me.
Yep, we got you.
Okay, so we have a question, a couple of questions about sharing the recorded session. So if you could just say one more time where the session will be available, the recorded session will be available.
Hi, so this is Carla. This session will be available on the Genome Unlocking Life's Code website, which is unlockinglifescode.org. And so it will be placed sometime a few days after this, but it will be available for viewing.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Easter. Okay, so we have another, this one's more of a comment. So when you ask the question about where you go to for your genomics news, one person mentioned that scientific articles were not an option in the poll, and somebody else said, I don't go to any of these sources for genomics. So maybe you just want to make it clear that what type of communication this is.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. We only have 4 options on our poll, right? So we had to pick from those 4. So yeah, absolutely. And we were trying to get across that there is, maybe I should have said digested science news or something like that, right? I mean, I think that's what we're going for. Absolutely. If you go to the primary literature, that is awesome, right? That is a great place to do it. You know, we just all can't, unfortunately, that could take up all of our time, right? So a number of us also look at digested science news, either from tweets about it, to news stories about it, etc. And I should have mentioned that something else I'm seeing a lot more on Twitter are these tweetorials, where the authors of a science article actually write in advance, 8 to 11 or 12 tweets that basically lay out the main messages of their article right on Twitter. So I love that trend, because then I can just read it right there, and then go to the article if I want to hear more. So that's another option that is available to people. Thank you.
Okay, and someone else asked 2 related questions, so I'll read them both. One was any views about using artificial intelligence to find a matching journal to your manuscript draft? And then the second question was, do you have a favorite artificial intelligence platform for searching scientific bibliography?
So for the first question, I actually haven't heard of any artificial intelligence for matching a journal to your manuscript draft. Is that something that people are doing?
Yeah, there's one called Jane.
Jane?
And I cannot remember the website, but we can find it later. It stands for something, and I can't remember what it stands for. But I tried that recently when I was trying to find a home for a paper. It did not go so well. So I would say use that with some risk. Admittedly, this paper was in kind of a weird bringing two areas together. But yeah, it's like a semantic matching tool. So Jane is one that I've heard. There's, if you just Google, I think there are other ones out there. I would say I've tried one with a genetics paper, and it got in the ballpark. It wasn't too bad, but yeah. Anyway.
That's interesting. Yeah, I usually just submit to wherever my advisor says. I mean, there's a certain set, when you work in a specific field, there's a certain range of journals that'll be appropriate for your your article. It kind of depends, because right now I'm working on wrapping up kind of a compendium of predictions that we're going to release, and it's a lot of data. So that might go into like a specific journal just because it's more of a data paper rather than a methods paper. So that's and the other one was for searching scientific bibliographies.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I don't use a platform for that either. Usually if I'm specifically like looking for something, I will use just Google Scholar. I don't know if Chris has any other suggestions, but
PubMed and Google Scholar. Google Scholar is particularly good because some of the work that I've done in autism and in science communication goes into psychology and other journals which are not indexed by PubMed, but Google Scholar will pick a lot of those up. But you should note that Google Scholar also will pick up a lot of preprints and bioarchive and thesis or dissertations, right? So you just have to look at each source accordingly, which I'm sure y'all do anyway. So.
Okay, so we have another interesting, very broad question. Why is it so challenging for subject matter experts to use plain language?
I think because that's what it takes you so long to use all the terms, and you use the terms so much every day that just becomes the language that you speak. And it's difficult to, like Brittany said, pull back out and go, oh, right, not everyone knows what a SNP is or a VUS or whatever, right? So yeah, I think we've all struggled with that. Brittany, what do you think?
yeah, I think another thing is we do scientific communication, but we usually go to conferences with people who already know, at least they might not be specific, like they might not know our specific question, but they know just a lot of the terms. And so it just kind of reinforces a cycle where we're only kind of communicating with other people that know the science and a lot of the jargon. A good strategy is to try to explain it to a relative or a friend who has nothing to do with science and see if they understand it. That's a good strategy when you're writing too. See if you're writing at a level that avoids jargon. And then I guess the big thing is that we know what it means, so we kind of forget that other people just don't know what certain terms mean.
Well, and also a lot of the terms came about for a reason. So like variant of unknown significant or VUS, it takes a paragraph to explain that, right? What is a genomic variant? What does the significance mean? Why is it unknown? And why is that important, right? So yeah, it's just a lot easier just to use the term, right? but yeah, I just totally agree with everything you said.
So we have a couple of questions, and I think it's not quite easy for me to tell, but I think what this person is asking is whether these would be suitable broad topics for genomics insights. So the first one is how do psychological and economic factors affect genomics? And also, is it okay to choose gene editing tools like CRISPR for the topic? So I think they're asking in general topics surrounding gene editing tools like CRISPR and how psychological and economical factors affect genomics, if these would be suitable broad categories that would be suitable for genomics insights.
Yeah, so they would both be suitable. For the CRISPR one, you would have to probably narrow that down a little bit because there's a lot of articles about CRISPR. So what about CRISPR? So you might want to focus on something a little bit more specific than that. But both are perfectly fine and within the range of what we would accept on Genomics Insights. I can't obviously just be 100% sure until I read the paper, but when we review articles, we make suggestions. And so if you don't have certain aspects of it complete, like Chris said, like the so what question, when we review your article, we'll say, hey, you didn't really do the so what question, like the big punchlines. And so you'll have an opportunity also to improve over time if you need 2-3 revision cycles just to get your article, because we're here to help too. So if your article isn't 100% there when you first submit, we'll try to get you in a place where the article's looking good. And so the topics themselves seem fine for Genomics Insights.
Okay, so the next, and we're coming down to the last now. So these two are, one's a comment and one is a question, but they're kind of related. So someone said, I wish I would have heard about the X chromosome being fully sequenced. And then someone else asked the question, are there additional favorite hashtags or accounts on Twitter you recommend for following genomics or new science in general? So I think the end-to-end sequencing of the X chromosome is pretty recent, but it seems from the poll that a lot of people probably missed that. And so if they're following accounts on Twitter, or I would extend the question to say, do you have any favorite news outlets that you would recommend? Maybe your top 2 or top 3 you would recommend for following genomics or science news in general?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I would say we set up the poll so that there was only one answer they could pick, and then CRISPR was newer. So I think for many people, that's why they didn't pick the X chromosome, because the CRISPR actually was the newer one. So the X chromosome, telomere to telomere, we call it, sequence paper came out, it was either July or August, I can't remember which, and it is on the genome.gov website. So absolutely, I would encourage you to look at genome.gov. Our communications team works with Carla's team, the education and community involvement, to have such great resources on there in terms of looking at exciting questions like these. And I know they had a lot of coverage with that. The paper was published in Nature, so you can also look on the Nature site. They had some things on there about it, specifically about that, the X chromosome one. I did my PhD and postdoc on the X chromosome, so I'm also really excited about that. I thought it was awesome. And the investigator who did a lot of the work, Adam Philippi, is at Human Genome. He's an intramural, what we call it, investigator. So we were all very excited about that. So and then I'll say my favorite places then Brittany, if you want to go. So a lot of the places that I follow for more in-depth genome news, there's a web newsletter called Genome Web, which is a lot of fun. I have a lot of friends who work there, and they helped be responsible for the kind of snarky headlines that are with a lot of stories. So I just think that's funny. So I look at Genome Web, that's like really in the weeds, a lot of genomic stuff, but they also bring your attention to like New York Times or Washington Post or other place stories about genomics too. So it's kind of an aggregator. On Twitter, I follow a lot of different people. Let's see, good reporters on genomics. So Ed Young, obviously, used to do a lot more, but now he is off on coronavirus. I'm gonna have to think about that. I don't know, Brittany, you go and I'll keep thinking.
Yeah, so at least for me specifically, I mentioned this earlier, on Twitter, I'm just following a lot of scientists who are in my specific field of 3D genomics and gene regulation. So that's how I get most of my news, but because they will also retweet other articles, maybe people that I'm not following that are in the field as well. So I've just been finding papers after papers, and I haven't used Twitter as much as I have since I started my postdoc, just because it's such a useful tool to find papers. And I also follow the bioarchive Twitters, which gives me the preprints. And a lot of people in my field are doing preprints now too, so that's always something to look at. Although bioarchive can be kind of overwhelming because there's a lot of preprints coming out all the time. So,
but they do have bots that will let you narrow it down to specific fields. So there's a bioarchive genomics, which will only tweet genomics preprints. There's an evolution one. Like, people have created a whole bunch of different ones. So I agree with you on all those two.
Yeah, I think I follow the bioarchive that kind of gives me the 3D genomics. There is one for 3D genomics too, I think.
Even more specialized. I love 3D genomics. That's the best. That's awesome. Yeah. And then Faith, I'm sorry, just to answer your last question, again, as Brittany just said, a number of investigators in the fields that I'm interested in are actually now on Twitter and doing a lot of stuff. So if you're at Michigan, Richard Linsky, who has done the long-term evolution experiment, he's a lot of fun on Twitter. He tweets about it all the time. He did a great, if you're on social media and you saw the how it started, how's it going meme, he did a great job because he has a colony of E. coli that he's propagated through, I don't know, millions of generations now or whatever. So it's really cute. Like, people are getting into a lot of that. Genomics has a lot of great tweeters. There's another guy named Ewan Burney who is in the UK who has spent a lot more time lately doing more explainers about genomics and genetics. He's also a good person to follow. UNEWAN, Burney.
Excuse
Bless you.
Bad timing for a sneeze.
It's all good.
Okay, I think these are all the questions we have, and I just put in the chat the link to the Unlocking Life's Code where you could find genomics insights, and I will also just type in here very quickly genome.gov, which is another place where one of our favorite places to see what's new in genomics. So I think I'll turn it over to, I'm not sure if Dr. Easter is still here, but.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm still here, Faith. So thank you all. Thank you all so much for joining us, especially to Dr. Gunter and Dr. Baur, and Dr. Baur, excuse me, and to Dr. Plant for being such a wonderful moderator of the session. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to visit unlockinglifescode.org. And again, this will be recorded, and we will provide the recording in the next couple of days for review. But thank you for participating.